Okay, so as if things aren't bad enough as it is, we have to deal with fraudulent Catholic pastors on YouTube posing as fathers and deacons and calling themselves spiritual entertainers. Now, they come up with their own lies to their congregation. And that's what I'm seeing. Is so if when they smell money, when these pastors smell money, they're going to be there. So the pastors are in on the gold rush as well, So it's that thing of like the California gold rush days. It doesn't matter what a person's profession is. Even the pastors are going to follow along and uh, try to capitalize off of things. And so I've heard enough because yesterday this specific pastor said that what he does is he said he comes on YouTube as a spiritual entertainer. He has no desire to actually be a real pastor or anything like that, even though he said that a real bishop would be joining them or something like that. And so, but then he said he would go back to his own day job, or his real job on the weekend and do what he does on the weekend. And so it sounds to me like he's a fraud pastor who is preaching to churches on the weekends. And he's on YouTube during the week begging for money, more or less, is what he's doing. He said he was going to try to turn his YouTube channel actually into a business. And I was thinking, well, okay, so if you had a, why would you be trashing the people who are watching you? And that's what he's doing, is he's trashing the people who are watching him. And so it's kind of that same thing we see over and over and over again. And I don't know if he's getting upset because people aren't giving him money. And I told the man that I couldn't give him money, but he's tired of seeing the same faces, I think, over and over again. Now, when you go to church, don't you actually, when you go to a real brick and mortar church, don't you see the same faces uh, for years and years and years? But for some reason on YouTube, they have this expectation that they want to see different people all the time. And so when you come across pastors who are saying that they are spiritual entertainers and that they have their real preaching job on the weekends, they're treating YouTube and the platform like crap. And they're dismissing and they are marginalizing the people who have tried to go onto YouTube to be serious and talk about real things. And that's all they're doing. And when they say that they feel sorry for you because you don't believe in Jesus Christ. And so I had a pastor today say that I was living my miserable life. And so he's just been getting more and more of an asshole. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll show you how miserable my life is. I will just unsubscribe from you because I thought you were having a good conversation, but now you just want to attack me and be an asshole. And so if this is how you are to your congregation on the weekends, I mean, this pastor claimed that he used to be some kind of gamer or something like that, but he's upset. And someone had asked him at one time, they said, well, what happened, pastor? What made you change your mind to do what you're doing now? And which I thought was really funny, that there's always someone who comes in who's a voice of reason. And I thought the same thing as well, because pastor, I don't know what he was doing before. But now think about this. Catholic pastors speak in different languages and they learn different languages. They sing in different languages. And so what he's doing is he was talking about the church in the sense of that why should they be speaking in a different language? Well, and plus he has an accent as well, a phony accent. So that means he can be speaking in a regular American dialect on the weekends, and then he's speaking in a phony foreign accent on YouTube. So plus he's using artificial intelligence to cover and mask who he actually is to elicit a potential gift of money, because he was talking about that. And I would just write, and I would encourage other people to do the same thing. When someone asks for money, just tell them, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have the money to give you any because we have inflation." Now, a lot of the pastors, they don't want to talk about government. They don't want to mix government in with anything. And so all this pastor, well, hello, Thomas Borland. Yes, Thomas Borland, Tom Boring. Yeah. He actually did sound like a guy that I knew who was a pastor who could be in my local area. And that man was very, very arrogant and mean to me, and he actually had grabbed my arm and tried to pull me down because he was walking around outside of my house during COVID, when I had a place to live, and he was very, very arrogant. And he was always talking about the Catholic Church all the time and saying that the Catholic Church is broke and everything. And he had a really childish demeanor about himself. Now, he was an old man, over 70 years old. And, well, no, he said he was in his, at that time, he said he was in his 60s, but right now he would be in his 70s. So many years have passed. And so I had told the old man what was going on, and, because I was in a very vulnerable situation myself. And so I was trying to reach out to people in my neighborhood because, like, TV is always saying, ask your neighbor for help if you need help or something like that. And and then you find out how much neighbors just don't want to get involved with anything. So when you're in a domestic abusive relationship and situation, there's a lot of places that your neighbors, they just do not want to get involved at all. Um, and the church, when TV puts on there that churches are willing to help, that's not true. They don't want to help, because then people would become a resident of the church. I don't know how that would work, or if it's even possible, but they're always talking about churches saying that they have a place for the homeless to be. Now, church is always talking about homeless all the time. Pastors they make their stories up. They're fake. I wouldn't be surprised if the majority of pastors don't have families. They don't have foster kids. They don't have autistic kids. They're lying about the amount of kids that they have. I think they're just plain bold-faced lying. I mean, that's just my opinion. I don't see it any other way. Because they come across as very phony. And a lot of times, it's just like some of the politicians, when they never show their family and they never show their wife. It's like, well, do you even have a wife? You talk about a wife all the time, but we never see your wife. And that's the same thing with a pastor, that everybody should. I think that is so funny when you have that name down there, Thomas Borland. I actually, I know exactly who you're talking about. Thomas Borland, yeah. Um, and I know myself, I can be quite boring, but at the same time, I'm trying to talk about issues I think that are important to the majority of people, and in creating a place where people feel safe to talk about things. Otherwise, people don't have a place to talk about things, and church is not one of them. We can't just go into a church and talk about things, because church is not going to want to hear about it. When, typically you would think that church would be a place where you can go to talk about, a place where you would feel safe, a place that is going to help you, but it's not. It's just not. But yet they put on TV all the time that churches are there to help people, and they don't. They're no help to anyone at all. no help whatsoever. And so when a church needs help, their own self, if they need a new roof or something like that, I know the church that I attended, they would ask the parishioners to volunteer their time to get up on the roof, because usually you're going to have some construction people who are going to church. So they would ask the people who know about doing construction, they would ask them to actually donate their time to fix the roof on the church. And even at the same time, the church is trying to raise money for a roof on the church. So, they can, even the smallest of churches can do a pretty darn good job, I think, raising money or putting out a call to action through other churches. So other churches might offer up their offerings because they're very well connected. So they'll get in contact with other pastors, other parishioners, and churches and missionaries, and and talk. That's how networking works amongst the church folks and the farming communities, and so they make sure that some people are taken care of. But if there's others who need help, then there might be a thing of exclusion. So in the community, this guy today was even saying, he was saying that churches built the United States. So he has a whole, so he's kind of a counter to other people who say they built the United States. So I wouldn't say that, that churches, that's if you're a believer of the church. And then they go into all that Enoch stuff, which makes no sense. I don't even know what they're talking about, because it's like they're mixing in some kind of myth or something. And and I always thought, well, if you have a church and there's only 40 people who attend your church, that just doesn't seem like enough money that a pastor would be able to survive off of that, because otherwise, how do pastors actually survive? So so I got to the point of, because where I always said, okay, well, this is a good reason to have a separation of church and state, because clearly churches do not want to be a part of the rest of the country. And that's what I've always thought. They want to be a commune of sorts and do things their own way up until they actually need help. Be that they get into an emergency situation, or say they have kids, or that there are people that are living at the church, which I think at one time, remember David Koresh? David Koresh in Texas, I mean, that was a big convent. I mean, Texas seems to have some really, really big problems with massive sized churches and polygamy and people who are just kind of hidden away from society. And then, and the churches have been trafficking people, and they get into a lot of trouble, and there's no help for the people. And then this is the problem with that too. I raised this with someone else, and saying that they always want to cite the phrases from the Bible about that men can have concubines, and that some of them in the Bible had 700 wives. And I have often thought, well, yeah, but see what they told me today, which had me leaving this YouTube church. So they were saying that I was putting too much emphasis on money. And I said, well, yeah, but we need money to survive. Every person needs money to survive and take care of themselves. So I couldn't figure out, well, how in the world is raising a fact, how in the world is that putting too much of emphasis on money? And so I said, well, the church doesn't want to address the issue of money, and they don't want to do politics either. And so that's where I got, because the pastor told me, he says, well, yeah, fine, you go on ahead and live your miserable life if you're going to be that way. And so they were making jabs really hard at people then who didn't want to believe in church. And so I was thinking, well, you know what? I don't want to listen to you anymore on YouTube. I just don't. We've listened to the churches on YouTube long enough. So now it's time to go back into the humor thing related to churches, where people make fun of churches. And they've been doing that on TV for a long, long time, with the Catholic priests and letting the kids get molested, because the churches want to claim that they take care of kids, but then it turns out that they actually don't. So if there's some foster care or monetary incentive, the churches just want the money for the foster care. They don't actually care about the kids. So the pastor is the person who wants taken care of. They don't actually want to take care of the kids. So I would say that there's a cause for alarm when I hear that a pastor has 8 kids and he's old as hell. He's like close to retirement age or older than that. That would be a cause for alarm right there into, well, where did he get his kids from? And are they in the state custody, or is he getting money to raise the kids and he's just doing it for the money? Which basically that probably is what it boils down to, that he's doing foster kids because his career as a pastor isn't working out so well. But he knows maybe at one time he could be an older pastor who remembers from 50, 60 years ago when times were better, because people were going to church at that time and they were freely donating. Well, now people aren't willing to donate and part with their money as much because of inflation. But yet the pastors are trying to get people motivated and going back to church. And so there has been kind of a push with Donald Trump and saying that he likes churches and that people need to go to church. And so Donald was kind of pushing church himself, saying that people needed to go to church. And I don't believe that, because when I was a kid, we were taught our body is a temple of Christ. And I thought, okay, if that's true, I really don't need to go to church. I can treat myself good. I can choose to treat myself good. I'm made in the image of God. That means God resides in me, God and Jesus, however they look at that. And I had actually made the point myself on his video, and then he steals what I had said without giving me credit. Because I was the one who talked about the Trinity in having the Father, the Mother, and the child. And that's what the Trinity is, the Father, the Mother, and the child. But yet in church, they took it and they left out women. They basically discriminated women, is what church did, because they had God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. They left out women altogether. And so I see the Trinity as the Father, the Mother, and the child. And I have often thought, well, you can take and you can put in 5. You can make 5 with the grandfather, the grandmother, the father, the mother, and the child, and you can work it in with 5 in that sense. Because, and that's what born again is. Born again means the baby and the DNA of that child keeps being born again each generation. Church doesn't see it that way. They think of it differently. But what I look at it, and church also separates itself from the planet Earth. They don't want to have anything to do with the planet Earth, and they teach separation of humans from the planet Earth. Instead of living as one with the Earth, they separate themselves out from the planet Earth, and then they go off into this big divine intervention of some big Holy Spirit from out in the middle of nowhere. And so, I mean, and they make it all confusing and everything, and then they have an angry God, a very angry God. And church, plus it's very boring too. Their sermons are boring. They never do anything exciting. They don't have a two-way dialogue related to what other people think or what they think that verses could be. And so just the repetition of the same biblical phrases repeated over and over again to what they call the passages as God wrote them. Well, they're not even the same passages that God wrote. Because if God truly wrote them, or Jesus truly wrote them, or the people and authors of the books and chapters wrote them, they had to be translated from the Middle East if they truly came from the Middle East. But why couldn't we have had our own Bible in the United States, which we could have? We very well could have. So everybody has their own version of the Bible. They add their own spins on it. That's what I'm seeing. And there's a lot more Bibles uh, around the world than what I ever imagined there was. Because I know at one time I read this phrase, and it said that the premise of church, or maybe it was something on TV, the premise of church was to get in all four corners of the world. So they wanted to spread their message around the whole world. And so when I was a child, we were taught that the Holy Christian Bible, the one that the King James Version, was pretty much the only Bible that we went by. But come to find out, there's all these other Bibles. And so I think I'm going to end it at this point. I've said enough about this topic, and it's true. Christianity is very boring, especially without in-depth discussion that goes into other places. And so I'm going to have to find a new topic to talk about. But I will poke fun at the religious side of things, and so I do have fun doing that. With humor intended.